Hello, students and colleagues. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gulnara Aymanbitlu. I am doctor, obstetrician gynecologist, candidate of medical science. I want to introduce you the first lecture of scientific research. The plan of our lecture: concept of science and scientific research, the importance of science for practical healthcare, the concept and significance of research, the algorithm and stage of conducting research, classification of scientific research, descriptive research designs, analytic research designs, definition of research, question of scientific research, and justification of literature of the topic. Research protocol, data collection tools. What is science? Science is spatial view cognitive activation directed on developing of objective, subject, justified, and systematically organized knowledge about the world. Scientific study. This specialized activity aimed at receiving new scientific knowledge which perspective can get practical application. It involves comprehensive study, research, objects, process, or phenomenon, their structures and connections, also receiving and implementation practice results, reducing morbidity, disability, and mortality. Scientific research. This research study directed on identification and solution scientific problems. In science, the problem understood contradictory situation emerged as a result of discovering new facts, which obviously not are laid down framework previous theoretical provisions. Importance of science for practical healthcare. Science plays a key role in the development of healthcare, enabling the transition from empiric methods to evidence-based medicine. Thanks to scientific research, we have vaccines, antibiotics, diagnostic equipment, and treatment protocols. The importance of science for practice, improving diagnostic and treatment. For example, new drugs and technologies, disease prevention, vaccination, sanitary standards, resource optimization, economic efficiency of methods, training of specialists based on current data. Without science, healthcare would remain at the level of folk medicine with high mortality and low effectiveness. In today's world, science saves millions of lives, extending average life expectancy by decades. Student scientific research, SSR. This complex of educational, scientific, managerial, and methodological character events. The goal of student scientific research is increase level competencies. Students on basis vaccination skills conducting scientific research in relation to chosen topic analysis, working with data, development of critical thinking, instilling interest in scientific activity. The research work must be logically complete and demonstrate the student's ability to competently use specialized scientific terminology, clearly express their thoughts, and justify their proposals. Task: research and development work. Skills: independent scientific research activities and their application to decision, current practical tasks, search, analysis, domestic and foreign literature, conducting independent research by selected problems, collection, systematization, generalization, statistical analysis, data, and interpretations, received results in the course research, instilling interest in scientific activity. Forms of student scientific research, individual, collective, or will scientific research students work. Preparation scientific abstract on given topic, student scientific research marks, involving students in research projects financed from various sources, participation students in student scientific organizational and competitive events of various levels. General outline of scientific research, research planning, organization and conduct of research, creation of an electronic database, statistical analysis of collecting data, visualization of research results, interpretation and discussion of obtained results, presentation of research results. Researching planning, formulating research question, justification of its relevance, formulating the research topic, definition of the purpose and objectives of research, definition of methodology, object and subject of the research, selection of research method, description of the research process. So name research protocol. Organization and conduct of the study, make calendar plan, make what works schedule and strictly follow it, conducting survey interview, carrying out data instructions, recording of surveillance monitoring data, collection of primary research materials, copies of maps, questionnaires, copies of laboratory results and instruments, data compilation of electronic database, date entry into an electronic database, editing an electronic database, statistical analysis of collected data, descriptive statistical procedures, analytic statistical procedures, statistical inferences. Visualization of research results, compiling tables, design of diagrams, interpretation and discussion of obtained results, comparative data analysis, logical interpretation of data, comparison with results of other researches, formulation of findings, conclusions, and recommendations. General outline of scientific research, forms of presentation of research results. They are maybe oral, report or message, written, publish, unpublish. What are research medicine? Primary, secondary. Primary, they are basic research, genetic, biochemical, experimental of animals and cellular cultures, development methods, observation research, divide to descriptive and analytic. Descriptive, there are clinical happening, serious case, transfers, epidemiological, and ecological. Analytic studies are transfers, case control, Hogarth, ecological. Also, we have experimental research, RKI, NKA, PREF, and post-experimental research. Secondary, there are review, systematic review, simple review, and meta-analysis. Observational studies. During observational studies, research does not interfere with the course of events or influence of participants or factors being studied. Moreover, the results of such studies, unlike fundamental studies, are caused to the condition of real clinical practice. Observational study can be descriptive and analytical. Depending on the duration of health observation, distinction is made between cross-sectional and longitudinal studies. Cross-sectional studies study the prevalence of disease phenomenon in a population and are conducted by collecting data at a certain time. Cross-sectional longitudinal studies or prospective involve observing a certain contingent over time. Hogarth case control. Descriptive research. Descriptive clinical, there are description clinical case, description serious case, descriptive cross-sectional study. Descriptive epidemiological, morbidity, incidence, prevalence, affected, mortality, mortality, disability, fertility. Descriptive research. Who, what, where, when. It is questions that we must answer. Collection of information, grouping of data, statistical data processes, description of the identified manifestations of morbidity and morbidity raised by to the person who morbidity, mortality, disability, distribution by age, gender, social status, education, underlying pathologies, bad habits, complications, and so on. Place, where, country, region, city, village, neighborhood. Time, when, long-term, annual, average annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly distribution of phenomena. Descriptive research. The goal is to identify problems of medicine and prevention in general and by nosological forms of disease and to form hypotheses about risk factors. Objectives. To describe the intensity, dynamic, spatial characteristic and structure of mortality, identify the time, groups, and territories at increased risk. Descriptive epidemiology seeks answers to the question who, what, where, and when, and never attempts to answer the question why. That is, who become ill, when they become ill, and where, under what circumstances they were exposed to the disease-causing agent. Features of descriptive research. They are carried out without testing hypotheses. Data obtained during descriptive study can be further used in analytic studies to test hypotheses, describe the phenomenon by person, time, and place. Advantage of descriptive research provides complete description of the phenomenon by person, place, and time. It does not require large expenses or resources and can be done retrospectively. Generate a hypothesis about the cause and effect relationship. Disadvantage of descriptive research cannot prove causation, low level of reliability of results. Description of a clinical case or case series. Description of clinical case report. Description of rare disease and unusual clinical cause or an unexpected treatment effect in a specific patient. This is not experiment, but simply recording of observations. How it is done? The doctor describes the patient medical history. Here you see patients, symptoms, diagnosis, treatment, and outcome. This includes examination date, photos, and tests, anonymized. Rapid dissemination of information about rare cases generate hypotheses for further research useful for physician education. No control or comparison can generalize to others. Case series description. Description of group series similar clinical case in several patients. This is extension of case report but without comparison with control group. How it is done? Data is collected on patients with common diagnosis or treatment, describing common features and outcomes. There is no underversion, only retrospective analysis. Example, description of 20 cases of complications after vaccination in one clinic. Descriptive cross-sectional study. The researcher may be interested not so much in the true case between the impact of factor of disease, but in relevance of problem of the spread of disease, how it is conducted. Data is collected from group of people simultaneously, service device. There is no dynamic analysis, only snapshot. Example, survey of 1,000 city residents on the prevalence of smoking and hypertension in 2025. Advantages, fast and inexpensive, reflected the real situation on the population. Useful for health planning needs assessment. Disadvantages does not show change over time or causally. There may be errors in data collections, for example, self-reporting, medium level of evidence higher than case control, case report, but below analytic ones. You see a table comparison in the descriptive research. Descriptive cross-sectional study. The advantage of these studies, maintaining the original number of participants throughout the observation period, which is not typical for longitudinal studies. Speed for execution and relatively low cost allows you to develop hypotheses for additional research, have the ability to repeat the study trends and compare results, research limitations, inability to determine the sequence of events, what came first, the action of risk factor or the observed outcome, and to make an inabilities conclusion about the cause and effect relationship between them. Analytic research designs. Stage of conducting analytic research, collection of information, grouping of data, statistical data processes, description of the identified manifestations of morbidity and mortality rates by person, birth rate, morbidity, mortality, disability, distribution by age, gender, social status, education, underlying pathologies, bad habits, complications, place, country, region, city, village, quarter, time, long term, annual, average annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly distribution, formulating hypotheses about risk factors, conducting analytic research, establishing and measuring causality. What is the one of the first analytic study? It is answer to question why, how, in what way. The goal of Hager study it is determine the causes of emergency and spread of diseases. In any Hager study, the relationship between causes and effects is determined by moving from the suspected cause to the effect, most often from the risk factor to disease. Hoger study. Study that examines relationship between the effects of certain factors and clinical outcomes. The Hogarth is a group of individuals with common characteristics at the initial stage of study and have been monitored over time. It is the most strict the observational research project. Exposure procedures disease. They are best suited for answering a question about forecast. Synonyms: longitudinal, etiological, prospective. It is usually prospective, but it can also be retrospective. The descriptive purpose is to describe the frequency of exposed results. The analytic goal it is analyze the relationship between impact and results. Hogarth study compares two or more groups exposed and unexposed. It is assumed that the exposed group is greater or less risk of disease compared to the unexposed group. It is similar to clinical randomized trial in the focus of study from effect to outcome. It differs from clinical randomized trial in that in observation rather than experimental study. Advantage of Hogarth study. You can track the change over time. Exposure procedures the disease. It is possible to determine the relationship and sequence over time. They can be used to study relative rare exposures with careful selection of groups of people by the nature of exposure. Hogarth of the second type. A wide range of pathologies relates to the studies exposure can be studied. Advantage of Hogarth study, detailed information. The interfering factors can be obtained, which will allow them to control either at the planning stage or during data analysis. Measuring the actual risk of illness depending on exposure provides more understandable data for non-specialists. Disadvantage of Hogarth study. Large volume of research, significantly exceeding the volume of case control studies. It is not used to study rare disease. Duration of the study, especially with prospective Hogarth, taking at least 10 years, except in case with high risk and rapid outcomes. High quality medical documents are needed to retrospective studies. It is difficult to achieve 100% traceability, and this can negatively affect the reliability of the research results. High cost of research, the exposure at the beginning of the study may change during study. Measures of association, relative risk, RR, used to assess the presence of relationship between risk factor and occurrence of disease. Risk of using NAS in the development of oral mucosal cancer. Case control study. Case control study, retrospective analytic study, examines the relationship between clinical outcomes and effects of certain factors, usually risk factors. The most common analytic study, it is a best study to answer the question of etiology. It is usually the only opportunity to study rare disease. First cases of disease are detected. Hypothesis about possible risk factors is put forward retrospectively. A retrospective analytic study examines the relationship between clinical outcomes and the effects of certain factors, usually risk factors. Control group of people who do not have this disease is selected. Similar in other features to the study group, the presence or absence of risk factors in the compared groups is determined. High prevalence of exposure in case group may be a risk factor. At the time of the study, all outcomes are known. It differs from the whole study in the direction from the result disease to the effect exposure. Study happening control. At this table, we see such groups as subjects to action of the factor, non-subjects to action of factor B, subject to action of factor with and not exposed to factor, non-sick, sick, and we have such group sick happening, non-sick, it is control group. Case control study advantage, the most prompt investigation, comparative cheapness. They are good for rare disease in which Hogarth and cross-sectional studies are unsuitable. You can exposure at several impacts the same time, ethically safe. You can set the time and direction of events. Evaluation of criteria for suitability of results can be standardized. On the administrative side, it is cheaper and simpler than Hogarth and clinical randomized trials. Disadvantage of case control. They are not suitable for studying rare exposures. They cannot set the frequency of the disease. There is a possibility of systematic error in the selection of cases and controls. There is possibility of systematic error in the collection of information. They depend on memory of the impact of factors in past. It is difficult to select a control group for comparison. Influencing factor may be related to hidden interfering factor. Ensuring blindness, it is difficult. No randomization is performed. Case control study measuring of association. Ratio OR. Odds ratio is statistical measure, one of the main way to describe in numerical terms extent to which the absence or presence of certain outcome is associated with the presence or absence of certain factor in a particular statistical group. The odds ratio allows us to estimate the relations between certain outcome, occurrence of disease, risk factors. The odds ratio allows us to compare study groups based on the frequency of particular risk factor. Importantly, the use of odds ratio not only determines the statistical significance of the relationship between factor and outcome, but also quantified it. Calculating the relative risk in a case control study is possible if prevalence of disease in the population is known. Stages organization and execution of research question. Choose problems. Collection information about already existing science knowledge by the issues being studied. Analysis and generalization by problem received existing knowledge. Nomination question research hypothesis. Development concept and planning research, selection methods and methods conducting research, processing received data, written design received results, presentation work on review, performance to publication or oral report. What is the research question? Research question is specific problem or area you plan to study. It forms the basic for constructing study, defining its boundaries, methods, and expected results. Its wording should be clear, avoid ambiguity. For example, instead, how can education be improved? Ask, how does digital adoption impact student performance? Focus, cover one topic or issue. Research much must allow data collection and analysis. Relevance, the question must be related to real problem or knowledge gaps. Stages of defining the question. Topic identification. Select an area of interest. For example, ecology, medicine, education. Gap analysis. Review existing research to identify unanswered questions. Narrow your focus. Identify the specific aspect. For example, impact of air pollution on health in a particular region. Formulation. Use questions such what, why, and how. For example, how does air pollution affect disease rates in Bishkek? Hypothesis. This assumption put forward for explanation what are the phenomena which not confirmed and not refuted. Hypothesis suppose solution problems. She defines the main things directing scientific research and is main methodological tool organizing and all research process. Scientific hypotheses are presented next to main requirement. Hypothesis not should contain concept which not clarified and should be verifiable at help existing methods. Main difference between research question and hypothesis. Target. Research question aims to identify problem or area for study, setting the scope of the study. Hypothesis propose specific explanation or prediction that will be tested in the research. Formulation. Research question is usually open-ended, does not empty specific answer, and begins with interrogate what, how, why, which ones. Hypothesis is a statement definition. Research question is clearly stated question that the study aims to answer. It defines the direction of study, specifies what the researcher wants to know. Example, how does social media use affect stress levels in adolescents? Hypothesis is the proposition or statement based on preliminary data or theory that can be tested empirically. Hypothesis propose possible answer to research questions. Example, using social media for more than 3 hours a day increases stress level in adolescents. That can be confirmed or disproved. It is often formulated as a cause and effect relationship. Role in research. Research question is the starting point that helps determine the purpose and methodology of the study. Hypothesis is more specific tool that is tested using the collected data. Not all studies require hypothesis. For example, quantitative research. Example in contest. Research question. What effect does distance learning have on student performance? Hypothesis. Distance learning reduces students' performance compared to face-to-face learning. Briefly, research question defines what to study, while hypothesis suggests what the outcome might be. Question is broader and more universal, while hypothesis is more specific and testable. Stage of formulating research questions. Selecting topic. Identify general area of research that interests you. Literature review. Review existing research to identify gaps in knowledge. Verifying the question. Formulate question that is specific and aim at solving the identified problem. Realism check. Ensure that the question can be answered within the available resources, time, date, methods. Key aspects of the justification of relevance. Scientific significance indicates how the research adds to existing knowledge. Example, studying the impact of online learning is relevant due to the increased popularity after the pandemic and the lack of long-term data. Practical value shows how the results can be applied. Example, the results will help educational institutions optimize online learning programs. Social signification emphasize the impact on society. Example, the results will improve access to education for remote regions. Timely links the topic to current events or trends. Example, growth in the number of students using digital platform in 2025 requires updated approaches to teaching. How to justify relevance? Explore the context. Conduct literature review to understand what aspects of the topic have not been significantly researched. Define the problem. State what problem your research solves. State the significance. Explain how the research finding may impact science, practice, or society. Give examples. Refer to real data, statistic, or events that support the relevance of the topic. Practical recommendations for students. Start with interest. Choose topic that interests you to stay motivated. Consult with your supervisor, discuss your research question and relevance to ensure they are appropriate. Use SMART principles. Specific question must be clear, measurable, ability to collect data to answer question, achievable realism within the framework of research, relevant correspondence to scientific or practical problems. Time bound, ability to complete the study within the time limit. Check for novelty. Make sure your question does not duplicate already solved problems. Let's continue. Research protocol. Protocol research, this physical recording, which in detail is described study. This document helps researchers conduct their research as smoothly as possible without breaks and obstacles. Protocol research and development work consists of introduction, relevance, target, tasks, materials, and methods informational sheet. Forms inform consent. Target research. This is that scientific research which must be related in the end total research. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. Task of research. Those research actions which necessary execute for achievements delivered for works, goal solution problems, or for checks, formulate hypothesis research. How role distinguish three groups tasks which connected with identification, essential science and criteria of studies phenomena or process, justification of method solution of the problem, formulation of leading condition of provision, effective solution problem. Research question requires special proof and final statements result conducted scientific research. Research question directed on getting answer results which should be confirmed or refute proposed hypothesis. Object of research, basic element of study. Item of research, characteristic of object research which are subject to study. Conclusions and recommendation. It is trace clear structure. There is results and conclusions. Forecast was made given recommendations. Quantity conclusions equal number delivered tasks. In conclusion, describe decree achievements goals. Recommendations were proposed, done, forecast and mark prospect. Design scientific research, systematic plan directly connected with the set task describing how conduct study to answer on research question or check hypothesis. Selecting design is an important step and requires careful consideration as it determines the quality of the study and reliability of its results. Different types of study pursue different goals and objectives. So, before conducting the study, it is necessary to clearly define the risk factors and outcomes being studied. Data collection. Data collection is a process of collecting information and measuring target indicators in an established system, which subsequently allows answering relevant questions and evaluate the results obtained. The purpose of all data collection is to obtain evidence of data quality, which allows the analysis to provide convincing and reliable answer to the questions and posed, regardless of fields of study or preference for data definition, quantitative or qualitative. Careful data collection is essential to integrity of the study. Methods of collecting information data: interview and service, observation, experiment, panel, expert assessment. Survey method: questionnaire, interview. The first survey can be oral, personal, or written. In written survey, participants receive questionnaires forms that they must complete and return to the designated location. Telephone interviews are relatively inexpensive method for conducting service of any level of accuracy in terms of sampling. Geographic location of respondents is not of fundamental importance in terms of the cost of conducting interviews. Disadvantage of using this method: not quite complete control over the respondents' understanding and sincerity. There is no possibility to prevent visual material, samples, cards with answer options. The impossibility of conducting long interviews. It is difficult to hold the interlocutor attention for more than 50 minutes on the phone. The cities with insufficient telephone coverage, it is impossible to obtain a representative sample. Face-to-face interview can be formalized and informal. Formalized interview has specific survey design. Usually questionnaire contained prepared, clearly worded questions and well throughout response models. A formalized interview loses much of its meaning. It is respondents are not analyzed in terms of their social and demographic, industry, and geographic characteristics. Therefore, it requires the completion of passport that records the date on each respondent as dictated by the research program. Such interviews are conducted on the street, in stores, at public events, at respondents' homes, door-to-door service, and so on. Informal interviews are specific methods of collecting information with only topic and goal. There is no specific survey design. Informal interviews can be individual or group. Conducting individual, non-formalized interviews such as in-depth interviews and whole tests. In-depth interviews are series of individual interviews on given topic conducted according to the discussion guide. The interviews are conducted by specially trained, highly qualified interviewer who is knowledgeable about the topic and proficient in interview techniques and physiological approach. Each interview lasts 50-30 minutes and involves active participation by the respondent, including laying out cards, drawing, writing, and so on. Whole tests are in-person, semi-structured interviews conducted in a specially designed space. Typically, these are located in libraries, stores, lobbies of administrative buildings, and so on. Respondent and interviewer sit at a table, and interview takes place in a structured conversation. The need for whole tests is usually caused by one of several reasons. Testing bulky samples that are inconvenient to carry around apartments, or there is no certainty that the apartment will be able to conduct the interview under necessary conditions. Testing is limited to a number of samples. Use special equipment, for example, television and video, to demonstrate the material being tested. Interview, it is conducted in places where potential respondents congregate, but it is complex and not suitable for conversation on your feet. Group informal interview focus group. It is group discussion of issues of interest by representative of the target audience. The focus is such groups is subjective experiences of individuals who offer their understanding and explanation of given topic, including all its nuances. The conversation is moderated according to predetermined plan and is videotaped. Observation registration is a form of research through which systemic planned study of behavior of particular object or subject and their state of health is carried out. Data collection tools, consequences of incorrectly collected data may be inability to accurately answer research questions, inability to repeat and verify research data, distort results, waste resources, and can lead other researchers in unproductive directions. Main categories of data collection tools: quantitative tools, dictionaries, standardized dictionaries with closed or open questions to collect data from large group of respondents. Example, questionnaire to assess the level of student satisfaction with distance learning. Testing, the use of tests to measure knowledge, skills, physiological characteristics. Example, tests for determining the level of stress according to the scale of Dr. Holmes and Dr. Ray. Measurements and experiments using equipment or software to collect numerical data. Example, measuring the concentration of pollutants in the air using gas analysis. Data analysis, collection of data from existing database statistic achieves or software. Example, analysis of student performance statistics from university database. Main categories of data collection tools: quality tools, interviews, structured, semi-structured, or unstructured conversation with research participants. Example, in-depth interview with teachers about challenges of distance learning. Focus groups, group discussion to elicit opinions and views of participants. Example, focus group with students to discuss the impact of social media on their motivation. Observation, the systemic recording of behavior or events in natural or controlled setting. Example, observing student interactions in online lessons. Content analysis, the study of text, documents, media, or other sources to identify patterns. Example, analysis of social media posts to study public opinion. Mixed instruments, combination of quantitative and qualitative methods for deep understanding of problem. Example, surveying students' quantitative methods, followed by interviews to clarify their answers. Qualitative method. Thank you for attention. Now we finish our lecture number 1, Introduction to Student Scientific Research, Descriptive and Analytic Studies.